There's lots of ways to introduce our next guest. I mean, Ron, go ahead and just say it. I mean, you know what you always accuse this of being.
Yes, it's actually Mornings with Nancy on
Yes.
Moody Radio Cleveland.
I quote her all the time, basically do whatever she tells me. Nancy Kane is Program Director of the Caritas Center for Christian Formation and doing a series with us on the Enneagram. Welcome back, Nancy.
Good to be with you guys.
And I had the pleasure of spending the weekend at Spiritual Formation Retreat this last weekend in Chicago, and it was fantastic. I told my wife, and she was like, "Oh, this is great. You get to go have like a weekend away." I was like, "No, it's not what spiritual formation is." It's hard work spiritually, yeah?
Yeah, it is. It is because it's antithesis to everything that we want in the flesh. We want to be kind of left alone. We want peace without any cost to it. We want to just kind of, smell the flowers. And in fairness, we have solitude time scheduled within the retreat weekend, so people get to take walks and slow down and
it's not torture. It's good.
We don't put them on the rack and just,
No, we're not laying on the beach either, though. So, okay. We've been doing a series on the Enneagram, its personality profile. We have archived on social media and YouTube our previous conversations. You can go back and get caught up. But as we continue looking at this personality profile, today we're going to look at numbers 2 and 3 on the Enneagram. Let's start with number 2. Tell us about Enneagram 2s.
So Enneagram 2 are the helpers. These are the people that need to be needed. So they're the person that walks into the fellowship hall at church, and they're like a magnet to whoever they think has a need. So they're sizing it up even before sometimes the person has a need.
That sounds pretty good. How could that be bad?
Well, the backdrop of that is that they're sizing up where people have a need and then meeting it because they're feeding their own lack of feeling good about themselves. So as soon as someone says, "Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you for bringing these cookies to me. Thank you for, reaching out and giving me a call," it feeds their false self that says, "See, I'm really a wonderful person." And that the backdrop of that with the 2 is that if they're like, say they're constantly sonaring their spouse and constantly trying to anticipate what their spouse's needs are, and then somehow their spouse is not liking that, like they're just like, "Leave me alone, give me some space," then all hell breaks loose, and the fury of a 2 has no endless bounds. That they become very angry because they've been solving for, if I give you this, then you're going to love me, you're going to esteem me, you're going to think I'm great. So it's coming out of a unredeemed place.
Wow. So I didn't picture you going to the point of saying when they're not thanked for their helping, they've got a rage side almost.
Yes, exactly. Because the helping is coming out of this entitlement. See, I'm doing such a good job. You should thank me. And if you don't, I'm going to punish you for it. Now, the beautiful part, though, for 2 is if they begin to get in touch with their own motivations and reasons for why they're doing that and recognize that only God can love them well, that He loves them perfectly, they don't have to solve for other people, chasing other people in terms of meeting their needs. They move to a beautiful place of reflection, humility, and then when they're caring, they know how to care, but it's caring now from a different place. It's caring now from an obedience place, in a sense of being called by God to do it versus them doing it themselves. The 2s, when they're unredeemed, really don't feel the need for God. They feel like God's grateful to have them help them out.
Wow. Yes. The way you phrase that is true, though. And, as I think about this, we don't have any 2s on our team. I would have brought somebody in here. I'm sure we're all grateful we're not 2s hearing this one. At the same time, though, Nancy, I'm picturing a 2 saying, well, wait a minute. I mean, gratitude's in the Bible. We should be thankful all the time. People should thank me. What's wrong with wanting to be thanked for helping?
It goes back to our mandate. We give not because we're going to be thanked, but because freely we've received, freely we give. Freely we receive the love of God towards ourselves. Freely we receive salvation. Freely we give. And so the ideal is we're only giving from what the heart of God has given us. And so, yes, people should thank for that. But once we go to that posture, it's pride saying, tell me again how helpful I've been to you.
Well, but if I'm a 2, I could say, but can't my wife thank me sometimes, like once, Nancy?
I would say it's the whole notion of why are you doing what you're doing? Because the ego is just so pervasive in most of us that as soon as we want thanks, and then it goes to that unredeemed part of us that says, whew, now I feel better about myself.
Wow. And see, so many of us don't want to think about it at that level, right? Because you read the scriptures, you're supposed to help the poor. Look at me, I'm helping the poor. And Jesus wants to give me a high five now.
Exactly. And that's just not the case. We do whatever he's called us to do. But I think that for many people, this whole notion of coming in touch with your motivation is not easy, as well as God is so faithful to show us. Many times burnout is the first invitation from God that you're doing things not out of obedience. You're doing them because you're looking for a
8:51 now, WCRF Mornings with Brian with us. She's the program director of the Caritas Center for Christian Formation. They have a brand new cohort starting in a few months. We'll tell you about that in just a few minutes. Nancy Kane with us looking through the Enneagram. We're in the midst of a series. If you want to cover some of the earlier numbers we've been looking at in that personality profile, you could certainly go and look in our archives. I think, Daria, it's on social and YouTube.
It's on our YouTube channel. Just search Mornings with Brian. It's its own playlist. You can watch all of them.
Yes, and we'll add this one a little bit later, and because we're talking with Nancy Kane today about Enneagram 2, which we just did, and Enneagram 3. Tell us about those 3s, Nancy.
So Enneagram 3 is the achiever or the need to succeed. So these are people that wake up in the morning with their to-do list and are off and running. They're constantly thinking about what they can do, what they can accomplish. They're always solving for how they can prove their competence and produce around them.
Well, that doesn't sound bad either. So are they the ones that are just great and they don't have a weakness, or?
Well, again, it's the motivation. What drives the 3 is feeling that they're not worthy of love.
Oh.
So somewhere along the line in their own growing up, they got the message that if they produce, if they accomplish something, then they would be esteemed, that they would be loved. And so then that develops into the almost an obsessive pattern of having to achieve, as well as, in fairness, we live in a 3 culture. I mean, it's who do we affirm in our culture? That the people that are achieving things, and that's really the heart of the 3. The problem comes in is that they don't like the 2s. They don't look too much to reflection. They look externally and base who they are by what they see in their environment. So 3s are always looking for certificates, for degrees, for the next promotion, and looking to see how much people are watching them in their process. So they're I saw a cartoon that said that 3s are always holding up the card that says advertise. So they're advertising their accomplishment, which is pride.
Now, I would presume that over time it gets harder and harder for them to feel self-worth, because at some point you can't keep achieving, right? I mean, you start to plateau in some way.
Well, and that's a great question. The what 3s do is I call it shape-shifting, that they are constantly looking at their environment through what they need to become or to be, so that they're esteemed and they're seen as successful. So even in their failures, they'll shapeshift and tie it up as something that really wasn't their problem. It was the environment. It was their boss. It was people just didn't understand, because it's so painful for them to look at their own failures. They'd rather not. And so it's, they don't want to, they're not prone to lying, but they're prone to deceit and self-deceit.
Just to get to that achievement idea.
Right. So, maybe they lost their job. it isn't that they lost their job because they were incompetent. They lost their job because the organization's so poorly run that they weren't managing their people well. And do you see, so that they go to the deceit part where you're left going, oh, well, poor them, when in fact it was perhaps their own performance that they weren't accomplishing. But the problem comes in for threes is that they can so deceive that they begin to start to lose their own sense of what's honest and true about them. So their own conviction about their own sin is very, very hard for threes to go to, because again, they're so for threes, it almost can be an addiction. They're so sonaring towards what they're achieving and how they're accomplishing. There's very little room to do any reflection.
I'd imagine, and you can correct me on this, that since American culture, you're saying, is essentially a 3, that ought to make it harder for a 3 to really grow.
Without a doubt. And I think that that's where the gospel comes in, is Christ invites us, as Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, he bids us to come die. That's very, very hard for a 3, because they're all about, wait a second, I've already accomplished these great things for God. What's so wrong with that? And again, it goes back to our motivations. God doesn't need us to perform well. He needs us to come love him with our whole heart, soul, and mind. So the invitation for Enneagram 3 types is to go to authenticity, vulnerability, integrity. Back to that illustration, if someone lost their job because they did not perform well, the invitation for 3 is to say, yeah, I did not do the job. I didn't know how to do it. And so consequently, I was incompetent. I lost the job because of not being able to meet the expectations of the organization. That is a breakthrough for 3, as well as for them to face relationally. Generally, 3s don't do well relationally because they're all about accomplishing. So they don't sonar for the needs of the closest people around them because they're so busy doing things.
Now, as we talk about these Enneagram numbers, again, this is not a major portion of your work at the Caritas Center. This was one lesson we did on one retreat at one point, because it helps us kind of see who we are and our areas of growth and personal reflection as we grow closer to Jesus. This might be resonating with people. If this is their number, they might be like, wow, I think that's me. But it's hard to break that kind of thing on your own. So if somebody's interested in joining your spiritual formation program at the Caritas Center, you've got a new one launching soon, so it's not too late to get signed up?
Right, exactly. It's starting in October, and they can go to our website, thecaritascenter.com. There's a click for either stay updated, and we're going to start sending out newsletters, as well as they can apply online for that, and they can send us a notification if they have in that stay updated, if they have questions for Ray and I. But you're absolutely right. This is one avenue that we use in one retreat, in one lecture, to help people begin to open their eyes to deeper reflections, as well as God's invitation for them to become shaped and formed into his image. And
if I can do it, you sure can. I'll tell you that. And if they can crack through this show, they can get through to anybody. So it's special thanks to Ray and Nancy for their work with me personally. And I highly recommend you go to thecaritascenter.com. The Caritas, spelled C-A-R-I-T-A-S, thecaritascenter.com for more information on their spiritual formation program. Nancy and I do a podcast together, too. It's called the Leaving Church Podcast, and we just finished a 4-part series on the stages of the soul, which is, what's your quick elevator speech on that one, Nancy, the stages of the soul?
So it's a roadmap of spiritual formation. It's a roadmap of who we're to become in Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and we talked about that in a 4-part series on the Leaving Church Podcast. Search for it wherever you get your podcasts, or there's more information as well at thecaritascenter.com. Nancy Kane, thanks so much. Next week, it sounds like you and I start staring in a mirror, I found out I'm a 5 just like you, so we're going to be tearing ourselves apart next Tuesday.
Can't wait.
Yeah, the team is pretty excited about that one.
Pray for courage. Pray for courage.
Yeah, right. Seriously, I need a little bit more of that. So I can't wait, Nancy. It'll be lots of fun. Thank you.
Thank you. Always good to be with you.
All right. But boy, Lauren, calm down. You can't be that excited.
Don't worry. We'll round out with me. Don't you worry.
Oh, that's right. You're going to be the last week.
Yes.
But that's fine. We can dig in on 5.
And they're all mean to 6s, so.
Yeah, 6s get a tough rap. I was a 6
really
and found
do.
out this last weekend I'm not.
Are you having an existential crisis?
I am. I'm like having to totally rethink my Enneagram
like
identity
5s.
here. Yeah, I didn't
fun.
mind it. I was kind of happy to leave 6s, to be honest.
Thank you.
But
wow.
that's not true. I used to say that that's the one thing we have deeply in common, and now we don't. It's like
No number is better than another. They're all
That's right.
equally their own people. They're all great.
Well, you're ruining my whole effort here to make my number the best.
Yep.
It says I'm number 1. Daria's always saying I'm number 1.
You put those words in my mouth.
That's true. I did. Okay, JD Greer wants to preach, so we better stop doing our show. But we'll be back tomorrow morning.